One, the Trump Doctrine, the Panama Canal, Canada, Greenland, the Gulf of America. How the Trump Doctrine helps us to understand the difference between isolationism, neoconservatism, and America First. And how we can apply the Trump Doctrine as we watch the fires burn in Southern California. Two, stay humble. Remember that discipline equals freedom. And other lessons in extreme ownership with former Navy SEAL and best-selling author Jocko Willink. Three, Navy SEALs take to the Capitol. Hundreds of Navy SEALs plan a march next week in support of Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth. We will speak today to several of those Navy SEALs. It is the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel and the Fox News Facebook page. Terrestrial radio across 24 markets in this great United States of America, but always on demand by subscribing at Apple or on Spotify. You can always join the Will Cain Show every Monday through Thursday at 12 o'clock Eastern Time at Fox News YouTube and Fox News Facebook. If you're watching today on any of those multitude of mediums, I hope that you will remember tomorrow to come join us here on the Will Cain Show. Several of you are back with us in this new year, and we love having you with us. Lynn Moss, 8976 on YouTube, writes in, my favorite show is the Will Cain Show. Glad you're back. Happy New Year. Hook 'em horns. Well, Lynn, I would love to invite you and the rest of the Willisha to make sure you tune in tomorrow to the Will Cain Show, where we're going to have a conversation together. You, me, the guys in New York, the guys on the show, about the future of the Will Cain Show. We'll talk about our relationship, how we're going to continue to connect with one another. There's changes coming, and I believe we can begin to have that conversation together tomorrow. So make sure, if you're subscribing on YouTube, to set a reminder. And that way, when we go live at 12 o'clock Eastern Time, you can jump into the comment section and join us, because I want to invite you along on a ride as things begin to change here on the Will Cain Show. But we have sad and big news today from across America. And we need to get to that because we have some fascinating conversations coming up. You don't want to miss our conversation with Jocko Willink. And several other Navy SEALs going to join us after that to talk about their support, their march in Washington, D.C., in support of Pete Hegseth, who begins his nomination hearings next January 14th, just next week. So we're going to set that up as what you can expect there, what kind of physical presence, what kind of testimony you can expect there in Washington, D.C. Plus, I mean, as you start a new year and you think about a new you, and there's so much we all want to commit to, I really don't know that there's anyone better to help us understand what commitment and discipline and extreme ownership look like than Jocko Willink. So we're going to get to all that a little bit later in the show, but let us start with story number one. Fires this morning rage in Southern California. These fires began yesterday, approximately 10:30 Pacific time, but they started to rage overnight. 80 up to 100 mile per hour winds, driving embers and sparks all across Southern California. As we speak, I believe there are something like 4 separate fires in different parts of Southern California. 3,400 homes so far have been destroyed. This morning I saw the news. There's been 2 fatalities. Dozens of people injured. Burns, reportedly, when it comes to the fire raging in Pacific Palisades, pushing people to the well-known restaurant Duke's in Malibu. It's a real travesty in every single way that you can imagine. And I can only imagine, perhaps, if you're watching today, slightly more than some of you, but I know not more than all of you. I went to Pepperdine in the 90s. Pepperdine, in the crosshairs of this fire, Palisades fire, as it burns down to the ocean and begins to move its way up the coast. You know, in a strike of bad luck turned good luck, about a month ago, we spoke about it here together, there were fires right on the doorstep of Pepperdine University, right up to the edge of campus. Pepperdine survived that fire. They have a long history of dealing with these issues. But what that fire did is burn away fuel for this current fire as it marches its way up the coast. But that's just the story for Pepperdine. Thousands and thousands of homes. Homes of stars, Chris Pratt, James Wood, Steve Guttenberg, either burned or under threat of burning. The famed Getty Mansion, the villa, looks like fires touched the property. I'm not sure it brought down the actual building. But it's not just the rich and the famous. There's Palisades Charter High School, which has been in movies and has been the place that a lot of stars have gone to school, engulfed by flames. But if you've ever been to Southern California, it's not just, although it is a lot of multi-million-dollar rich homes, and not that their pain and suffering is any less than others, but there are other people as well involved in this. There's middle class. There's mobile home parks. There's mobile home parks in Malibu. There's mobile home parks in the Palisades. There's generational homes, people who have been there for 3-4 generations living in this area that is so desired by many. It is an odd thing, like paradise and the price and the cost of paradise. This happens, and it's hard not to remember what we went through together here, what we experienced here together of the people in Lahaina, in Maui. It's just something about paradise. It's the mountains meeting the sea. You know, and there's a lot of compounding factors that make this sort of an inevitability. There is a great amount of risk assumption for all of us and where we end up living. You know, I live in Texas. I'm born and raised in Texas. We understand the potentiality of tornadoes. If you live in, you know, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, along the Atlantic seaboard, you understand the risk of hurricane. When the mountains meet the sea and it's dry and there's fuel and there's very little roadways for escape, fires are something that just happen. It happened to me twice in my 4 years at Pepperdine. I'm not here to personalize anything other than to give you the window how I have experienced something like this to perhaps shed some small bit of understanding. It is incredibly scary. I mean, it is darkened skies in the day. It looks like evening or at least dusk in the middle of the day. It looks like hell at night. Skies lit up orange. I've driven through these fires when we evacuate campus at Pepperdine, and it's like, how is this real? It literally is Dante's images of the Inferno. Beyond that, the sky and the air is filled with smoke, an inescapable first smell. You always smell like you did if you spent the weekend at a camp out. But beyond that, you guys know I was on the water polo team. We tried to practice through some of this because there is some semblance of life that has to go on. But boy, I got to tell you, your lungs burn with smoke. And that's days and that's weeks sometimes after. In the midst of all this, that's one of the biggest risks, obviously, is smoke. And the way I see it, there's 3 compounding factors that I want to hit on first. Whenever there's a disaster, okay, there is an instinct. And I think I once saw National View's Jonah Goldberg say this in reference to school shootings. We want to reach for the handrail of sanity. And one of the ways we establish sanity is try to grasp control. And blame is a way that we can control. We look for fault, we look for blame. And that instinct is not wrong, but it's an incomplete picture because bad things happen in this world. And here are 3 compounding factors to the risk assumption and the bad things of living in some place like Southern California. First of all, the wind. It's 80-mile-an-hour winds, reported winds up to 100 miles an hour. That's almost impossible to control. You can't get aircraft up there. Fire crews on the ground cannot put out these fires. First of all, the topography is mountains. It rolls. You can't get to it. It's burning out of control by the time it gets to a place where a fire truck could even reach. And it's huge. So you're putting it out with helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, which can fly in high winds easier. But this is hurricane force winds. And it spreads a fire so fast. This is exactly what happened in Maui. 80-mile-an-hour winds burned the entire town of Lahaina in roughly 1 hour. And so if you see maps, and there are maps out there, I wish I would have sent one in to share with us on the show, is the amount of spread of this fire in an overnight time frame, 6-7 hours, is unfathomable. It's unfathomable. 2, the just confluence of ecology that I just laid out. Mountain, sea, dry, brush, On about a 4-year cycle, this happens in Southern California. And by the way, the cycle doesn't stop with the fire. After that, you have mudslides. And of course, although not connected, you have the natural disaster risk of earthquake as well. And 3 is traffic. Just like in Maui, there was really one main thoroughfare in and out of Lahaina. Why? Because, well, it's a small town. There's only so much infrastructure built, but also sloping mountains dropping into the sea. It's the same thing right here in Pacific Palisades and Malibu. You have Pacific Coast Highway running along the coast. From that, you have small arteries. You have Malibu Canyon Road, which I commuted on daily. It's a 2-lane road, and it winds through these mountain canyons. And it's just, there's not many options to get in and out. And then you have, again, what happened in Maui. People abandon their cars. And they do it for a multitude of reasons. In Maui, it's because they're trying to escape literally the flames and smoke for their lives. Here, there's stories of mothers trying to get their kids out of school, and they can't get up to the school, so they get out of their cars and they run to the school to get their kids. In the meantime, they leave their cars unattended, and now traffic is totally shut down. There's video out there of bulldozers having to move cars in Southern California because people can't get up and down the roads. Fire crew, fire trucks, but also, people escaping. So they can't get through because of these compounding factors. And then there is the handrail of sanity. And I'm not here to absolve, but I'm also not here to indict. Who knows what the failure of leadership is right now? Mayor Karen Bass was on a trip to Ghana, Africa, during these fires. I believe she's back now, or at least on her way or soon to land back in Los Angeles. The LA fire chief, people are suggesting, was a DEI hire. Elon Musk has suggested the Democratic mayor that was defeated by Karen Bass was extremely competent. Instead, what you have is what you get now with the current leadership. Here's what I know that, again, from my experience, I think we can see some of this in North Carolina with the floodings from Hurricane Helene. We can see it certainly in Maui. Leadership is sometimes about direct response, but it is more often indictable in preparation. And when you have a state like California, whose priorities are often focused on ideological goals like climate change, green initiatives, and yes, DEI, because attention and resources are a finite game, they are diverted. It's a zero-sum game. We only have so much to give. It is pulled away from the priorities that matter to citizens directly. When you pay your taxes, there are certain things that you have a right to expect. Police protection, emergency response. And because attention and money are finite, anything given to misplaced priorities ends up something that can hurt citizens when they need their government. I want to tie this in really quickly to President Donald Trump and what he had to say yesterday, because we see here, I think, a Trump doctrine that prioritizes America first. So first, I want you to listen to President Donald Trump when he was talking about what everyone's talking about at this point, Greenland. Here's Donald Trump.
To Greenland and the Panama Canal, so forth. Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No.
And can you tell us a little bit about what your plan is? Are you going to negotiate a new treaty? Are you going to ask the Canadians to hold a vote? What is the strategy?
Yeah, I can't assure you. You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this. We need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military. I'm not going to commit to that now.
No good negotiator would commit to taking any tool off the table. Greenland offers us minerals, national security protection in the Arctic as we compete against Russia and China. It's not a new idea. I want to read to you from the New York Post. The United States has long been interested in obtaining Greenland, considering making it for the North Atlantic island in 1867 when we purchased Alaska from Russia. Roughly 8 decades later, after World War II, the U.S. bid $100 million in gold bullion for Greenland, which Denmark declined. However, the offer led to a defense treaty that granted the U.S. access to the Thule Air Base, now Patuxent Space Base, the military's northernmost outpost, which became critically important during the Cold War due to its proximity to Russia. This is about what is necessary for America. To me, it highlights something we need to understand. The the Hegelian dialect, the idea that there's two opposing ideas and we have to debate between these two opposing ideas, suggests to you that you're either a neocon or an isolationist. I don't think that's true. I don't think it is a dichotomy, a bipolar choice. Isolationism withdraws the U.S. from the world. Neoconservatism is an ideology-driven idea that suggests our ideals are those ready to be accepted by the rest of the world, and we can help through might and force to make Iraq a democracy. There is a third way, and that is the Trump Doctrine, I believe, where we engage. We engage Greenland. We engage the Panama Canal. We engage the world, but we do it through the lens of what serves America. This is why it ties into what's happening into California. Do we pursue an ideological vision of green climate change initiatives, or do we serve the citizens of California? Do we export democracy, or do we engage with the world through the idea that it first has to satisfy the question of how it helps America? This, I think, is the Trump Doctrine. And as a cherry on top, maybe we get to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Here's Donald Trump.
We're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name. And it's appropriate.
Has a beautiful ring.
It's appropriate.
The Gulf of America has a beautiful ring, and it's appropriate. This is the Trump Doctrine. What is the doctrine of extreme ownership? It's 2025. You may have goals. You may have resolutions. You may have commitments. What is it going to take? Discipline, humility, and extreme ownership. That with Jocko coming up here on The Will Cain Show. Hey, have you ever wondered what happened to the legendary Chuck Norris? I recently saw a video I was shocked. He's in his 80s. He's still kicking butt, working out, staying active. And here's what's even more shocking. He's stronger. He can work out longer. He has plenty of energy left over for his grandkids. And he did it by just making one change. Chuck says, by the way, he still feels like he's in his 50s. His wife started doing this, and it's one thing, and she's never felt better. She says she feels 10 years younger. Her body looks leaner. She has energy all day. So Chuck made a special video that explains everything. You make sure you watch it. All you have to do is go to chuckdefense.com/Cain, or by clicking on the link below this video, in the text description below this video. It's going to change the way you think about health. Once again, that's chuckdefense.com/CAIN, and click on the link below. You won't believe how simple it is. Just a reminder, the legendary Chuck Norris is a whopping 84 years old. He has yet more energy than me. He discovered he could create dramatic change to his health simply by focusing on 3 things that sabotage our body as we age. Watch his method by clicking on the link in the description box below, or go to chuckdefense.com/Cain. Jocko Willink, next on The Will Cain Show. Don't blame. Stay humble. Focus on discipline. Practice extreme ownership. It's The Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel and the Fox News Facebook page. Always on demand. Just hit subscribe at Apple or on Spotify. Jump into the comments section, become a member of the militia. You can ask a question, perhaps, and you can interact with Jocko Willink. He's a retired Navy SEAL. He's also the co-author of Extreme Ownership and also the other book, The Dichotomy of Leadership. He also hosts the Jocko Podcast. And he joins us here on The Will Cain Show. Jocko has like 10 other things that I could plug as well, like Jocko Fuel, other businesses that he's taken extreme ownership in. Jocko, you got to get up at 4:30 to get all that done, right? And that's what you did this morning?
Yes, indeed. Got to make time.
Jocko, tell me, one of the things that you write about and you say is relaxation is not a reward, but how do you relax?
I guess doing jujitsu. I train jujitsu. I have a jujitsu gym here in San Diego called Victory MMA, and training jujitsu is, relaxing might not be the best word for what jiu-jitsu is, because you're engaged in grappling combat with another human being. But I do find it a good place for my mind to take a little break.
At 4:30, when that alarm goes off, and I follow you, and I've seen you for years doing this, what is it you do right away? 4:30, it's the gym?
Yeah, just, brush the teeth and then go down, hit the gym. Always do something physical, some kind of physical exercise in the morning. I have to do that. Otherwise, the whole day falls apart.
How much do you sleep?
I try and go to bed around 10 o'clock, but sometimes I stay up until 10:30, 11. So somewhere, what's that, around 6 hours or so, it's pretty good for me. It's pretty normal for me.
Are you just one of
And
these guys kind of like you've never needed sleep like Donald Trump?
yeah, I wouldn't say I'm like Donald Trump because I've heard he sleeps, 3 hours a night. I've done that before.
Yeah.
Obviously I was in the military for a long time. So when you're in the military, there's going to be some nights you don't get much sleep. But, and different people it's just biology. Different people need different amounts of sleep. So I know a lot of people need 7, 8 hours of sleep. I'm good with, 5 or 6 hours. No big deal.
By the way, were you always that way? Because I've heard, Jocko, and I know a few guys in the community. You and I have talked through the television screen a few times. In Hell Week, SEAL training, BUDS training, of course, everything's hard. But like there's two things that I feel like everybody keeps coming back to: cold and sleep deprived. Were you like therefore cut out for the sleep deprivation?
The sleep didn't really bother me. And, I'm from New England and I grew up in Maine and Connecticut where it was cold, and the cold was, look, it's cold. I'm not going to sit here and try and say it wasn't cold. I was cold. I was shivering just like everybody else. But yeah, the sleep and the cold really were not that adversarial to me. Some guys that grew up in Florida where they grew up warm their whole life, I think it was a little harder for them. Not that plenty of guys from Florida don't make it. So yeah, I'd say I was pretty accustomed to the cold, and the no sleep was definitely an advantage through my whole career. Not needing a lot of sleep was an advantage. I picked the right career path for someone with that weird skill of not needing a bunch of sleep.
By the way, I think it was like 2 years ago during my summer break, I pre-recorded a ton of episodes here on the Will Cain Show. And one of the things I focused on was America's elite warriors. And I spoke to SEALs and Delta and Special Forces and Marine Raiders. And this is what always I'm fascinated by, Jocko, is like, what is the commonality? And it's really actually very hard to pin down because there's not a physical prototype. There's guys of every size. And I know in the end, when you boil it all down and we dig, the commonality is just a resistance to ever saying no or to quitting. It's like, that's the main thing. But you brought up, you're from the Northeast and Florida, guys. Is there any disproportionate geographic representation in the teams?
I don't know. I have had guys from all I happen to mention Florida, but there's guys from Hawaii that grew up in the tropical paradise of Hawaii. They're in the teams, no factor. Guys from Iowa, guys from Alaska, guys from all over the place. It really does just boil down to that individual human being and if they really want to be a frogman or not.
All right, I asked you how you relax. Talk to me about this. It's 2025. Look, man, I've made resolutions. I've actually got a different. My most success on New Year's resolutions was volume, Jocko. I threw like 20 at it 2 years ago, and I accomplished 50% of them. And I was like, that's pretty good, actually. Life is a volume business. Life's not about batting 1,000. It's about doing and failing and succeeding, and therefore it's like being a volume shooter in basketball. Have you I know you've done videos and you've done this on your podcast talking about commitment. Do you ever have, I'm sure January 1st means nothing to you when it comes to resolutions, but how do you handle like a commitment to a new resolution?
Yeah, we started something a few years ago. It's actually at Jocko Fuel, which you mentioned. We started a little something in-house. People were kind of doing their New Year's resolution things. And honestly, the first couple of years, I wasn't really paying attention to it because like you said, to me, January 1st is the same as January 5th is the same as November, whatever. It doesn't matter to me. It's another day. I'm going to get up and do what I do. But we did this program. It really helped a lot of people inside the team. It helped them out a lot. And then the next year we're like, oh, let's see if anybody else wants to do this. Let's see if people that are, customers, consumers, people that use the product want to do it. And we did it. And man, it was really amazing the kind of impact it had on people. We call it the DEF reset. Discipline equals freedom reset. And there's 8 daily habits you got to follow, for January: get up early, workout, prioritize and execute, drink water, clean food, no junk food, and take some time to remember the people that have sacrificed so we can do what we get to do today. And it's one of those things where when I saw all these different people really making significant progress, it was impactful. And so now we usually do a summer one and we do this one at the beginning of the year. And honestly, I think it's awesome. People make videos and they tag, the progress that they're making, the progress that they made. And the cool thing is it doesn't end January 1st. It's like a good New Year's resolution shouldn't end, January 31st. It should should keep going if it's something that you can sustain. So yeah, I think it's a positive thing.
Well, in that program, I did 75 hard, Jocko, which is kind of, I don't know if you've ever heard of 75 hard, but it's a little similar to what you just described. Like there was a water requirement every day. But what you just, I think that and I don't know that I've heard you specifically talk about this, but I'm sure that you have. What that seems to do, what you described about your program, is habit forming, right? So can you form habits through this minutia of what you do on a daily basis? And I don't know what the time frame it is required to create a habit. I've heard people say different time frames. But habit is very powerful.
Yeah. And to me, habit means you're going to do the thing without thinking about the thing. And where we run into our biggest problems is when we let our brain get involved in the decision-making process. If we're going to work out, if you put a donut in front of me and I just turn off my brain, my lizard brain says, yeah, eat that thing, eat that donut. But I have to engage my brain and make sure that I'm doing the right things for the right reasons. And the other side of that coin is like when it comes to doing physical activity, you can find a way to talk yourself out of that by debating with yourself and making excuses. Whereas if it's just a habit, it's just what you're going to do. You're going to get up and do the thing, go make it happen. So yeah, I think it is beneficial.
So habit, like you said, is the lizard brain. And you've already mentioned it once, and you've done videos again on this, and you've been talking about it for years, but it does, it's such a phrase, and it does resonate so much. Discipline equals freedom. So it's like, in order to get to the habit stage, before you even get there, of your lizard brain taking over, there's discipline that is required, which is, I think, a conscious commitment to a certain set of actions. And I love how you talk about it, the limitations of motivation and the power of discipline.
Yeah, motivation is just another emotion. It's going to come and go depending on how you feel that day. Well, discipline is consistent. It's going to be there whether you want it to be there or not. You get up and you be disciplined and do what you're supposed to do.
And it's counterintuitive for people. Discipline equals freedom. And it's counterintuitive, but the minute you hear it, you're like, yeah, I get that. And you can feel it. If anyone who's ever, even if it's just moments and windows in your life where you've been dedicated to a purpose and you've been disciplined about pursuing it, you know how you felt during that time, right?
Yeah, I think when people hear that phrase, the instant reaction is, oh, that doesn't make any sense. But as soon as they think about it for a minute, they say, oh, yeah, I remember how when I was in high school and I was very disciplined about preparing for tests, I got better grades on the tests, and therefore I had more freedom, to do what I wanted because my parents got off my back. And same thing with physical. If you have physical discipline to go and work out like you're supposed to, you have more freedom to, run down the street if you got to chase your dog. Discipline will give you freedom in all aspects of your life. And I think it sounds counterintuitive, but as soon as people really consider what it means, it makes sense. And that's why they can latch onto it.
Well, I think there's something else. And it may be in tension with another one of your lessons, which is relaxation is not a reward, but look, if I'm not disciplined, Jocko, and I'm not doing the things that I know deep down that I need to be doing, then my free time is burdened by guilt, and it's never truly enjoyed. I'm thinking, oh, man, I should have, I would have, I gotta. And I just feel it. And I would suggest maybe if somebody's watching and listening at home and they're like, I don't feel that way, Will, when I'm chilling. Do you not? Like, are you fully present and enjoying it? Where when I'm disciplined and purpose-driven and getting stuff done, when I do choose to turn off or relax, even though it's not supposed to be my reward, I can be fully present in that moment of relaxation.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's anybody that would deny that when you do something, whether it's working out, whether it's accomplishing a task that you were supposed to do at your house, whether it's getting a project done for work, everyone knows you feel better when you get done with that thing. And that's exactly what you're talking about. If you stayed in bed on Sunday morning and didn't get up and work out, well, by Sunday afternoon, you don't feel as good as you would have had you done the right thing. So yeah, right. I agree with you.
And it's hanging over you all day while you're chilling. You're like, I gotta go do that. And then you'll make excuses, then you won't do it, and the whole day feels full of guilt. Okay, I don't know if you've ever talked about this. So I love your history podcast that you do as well, Jocko. This discipline equals freedom. I think it's more than micro. I think it's macro too. So what I mean by that, and when I say you dive into history, you may have touched this. I think the founding fathers actually required this when they thought about a free society. First of all, they thought about a free society where there were limitations on human choice and behavior based upon a Judeo-Christian limitation. Like that's the discipline that they thought about. Like we're gonna be able to be free, and we don't have laws limiting our behavior because we have ethics and morals and code and religion that controls our behavior. Therefore, we don't need the government to do so. And that's like we're talking about it, what a single person, how they achieve freedom, but it requires discipline. But I think there's something to the whole society as well. If we're not disciplined as a society, we can't be free.
Yeah, I've heard some story about the fact that when we put the Statue of Liberty on one coast, we should have put the Statue of Discipline or Restraint on the other coast, because you do need that balance. And you're right. I mean, a country without laws is going to be chaos, and you're not going to end up with real freedom. Right? You're not going to have real freedom if you've got to watch your back every move that you make, and everyone's attacking each other and it's anarchy. That's not going to be real freedom. You're going to be a slave to the people around you, to other people that are trying to get things for themselves. So yeah, you do need, you obviously, you have to have laws, you have to have rules, you have to have structure. And once you have that, then you can achieve real freedom. So yeah, that's 100% accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, but not just laws. I guess what I'm saying is also there's just private choice and private enterprise and private belief that cumulatively on a national scale, culturally, allows us to be free. So we're not just base instinct. Freedom means I do whatever I want. Yeah, you're free. We hope you choose to be disciplined.
Yeah, well, we do have the freedom to make those choices. You can make all kinds of bad choices, and we see that happen all the time, unfortunately, to people. They make bad choices in their lives. Or in this case, what you're talking about from a governmental perspective, you can have governments that make bad choices, and you end up with bad situations happening. That is absolutely true.
Let me take that moment then to ask you about this. So I'm curious about your view on American leadership. I was happy to see this, Jocko. You put out a video. You supported my friend, my former co-host, Pete Hegseth, for Secretary of Defense. And by the way, also a mutual friend, Tulsi Gabbard. Talk to me about why that was important to you to put those videos out for Pete and Tulsi.
Well, I think looking at what's been happening in America for the past, few years, it's really clear that we need some people that are not that come from outside the system. And listen, I was in the military for 20 years. I spent time. I was what's called the admiral's aide. So I worked directly for the admiral that was in charge of all the SEALs. And that meant I spent a decent amount of time going to the Pentagon, going to meetings, and kind of, I don't claim to be, have in-depth knowledge, but I sat through plenty of meetings in the Pentagon and budgeting meetings, and understand the quadrennial review, and kind of just seeing a little bit about how that machine works, to know that it's a big, giant, bureaucratic monster. And at a certain point, you've got to bring some fresh eyes to take a look at that thing and really provide some corrective measures. And I think that Pete is a great candidate for that job. I think he's going to go in there. I think he's, obviously he was in the military himself, and so he understands what it's like to be on the front lines, which to me is extraordinarily important, to have the person that's in charge of the Department of Defense understand what it means to be sent forward into harm's way, and know what that feels like, and know what that truly means. And then I think the fact that he was a leader in the military, and when you're in the military, there's some stereotypical ideas that people think military leadership is like. I'm going to stand at the top because I'm in charge. I'm going to bark orders. Everyone's going to obey my orders. And does that happen in the military? Yes, it happens in the military. It happens in the civilian sector too. I work with a bunch of companies in the civilian sector. You have those type of tyrannical leaders in the civilian sector, and you have them in the military. They're more stereotypically viewed to be in the military, but good military leadership does not look like that. Good military leadership is a humble leader that listens to what people have to say, that hears out other opinions, that looks for not his idea, but the best idea, and then moves forward and makes that happen. And then when they make a mistake, they say, oh, you know what? We're moving in the wrong direction. That's on me. We're going to switch. We're going to change up. And, I haven't spent a lot of time with Pete, but I've spent enough time with him to recognize that he's a guy that's going to listen. He's a guy that's going to, when he makes a mistake, he's going to own that mistake, and he's going to get it fixed. So I think having that fresh set of eyes and that new blood is going to be good. I think there's going to be people, well, never mind, I think there are people that are horrified of that. There are people that are horrified of that new blood coming in with a fresh look, saying, "Hey, wait a second," literally the guys from Office Space coming in and saying, "Hold on a second, what exactly do you do here?" Because you go to the Pentagon, there's a lot of people that they're filling a seat, but I don't know what they're actually executing on. So I think that just that right there, what I said, bringing a fresh set of eyes, someone that has combat experience and is going to go in there with the sole focus of preparing the United States military to fight and win wars. That's what the military is supposed to do. Fight and win wars.
And that's what I find fascinating about your perspective. I would assume, Jocko, that doesn't just come from 20 years in the military. Since then, you've been advising companies about corporate bureaucracy and leadership. And so you've seen this play out in private enterprise, not just the military. So this humility, and by the way, that's one of your lessons. Discipline is freedom. Stay humble. And I know Pete well, and the way you describe him is 100% true. He is it sounds cliche to say man of the people. He wants to know the warfighter, the trigger puller, which he was one. He wants to consider them, and he doesn't want to do that first style of leadership you talked about, which, again, you've seen in every walk of life, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. You see tyrannical leaders, people that, they think that if they stand up and bark orders, and look, the sad thing about it is it works. If I'm in charge of you, Will, if I'm your boss and I yell at you and tell you to do something, it kind of works, because what are you going to do? You're going to, you got a job, you want to keep your paycheck. And so you do what I told you, do what I yelled at you to do. And although it works, that reinforces my behavior.
Do more.
I think that's the way to lead. Well, now, meanwhile, you're putting in a resume because you want to leave, or if you're in the military, you want to get out of the military. And yet, if you have a person that's a humble leader that says, "Hey, Will, we got this project. How do you think we should execute this thing?" And all of a sudden you go, hey, Jocko, here's what I think. And by the way, Will's been down there on the front lines interacting with the people we've got to interact with. I'm up here in the ivory tower. You're going to know better.
Right.
You're going to have a better answer. So yeah, it's great to hear that. And again, that's the sort of vibe that I got from Pete when I've interacted with him before. And actually, quite frankly, that's the reports I've got from him, from people that have worked with him, is that he's a humble guy, that he's a confident guy. Well, good. Right? I don't want somebody that lacks confidence. So he's a confident guy, but he's not confident. He's not arrogant. And I think he's going to go in there and have the capability of making some real changes. I think it's a very large organization to make the kind of changes that it needs, but he's at least going to get a start on it. And you never know, 4 years in that seat, he might be able to make some real changes that we need.
Well, what I love about that conversation we just had is actually inadvertently touched on like one of your three big principles you focus on, which is humility. Because you did it there. You talked about that's not the same thing as lacking confidence, but it is sort of separating your ego. And I do know that about Pete as well. Not an ego guy at all. Separating your ego from even your humility and your confidence. Like that's a separate thing. Your ego, set that thing aside. And then confidence and humility are more action-oriented as opposed to identity-oriented.
Yeah, and look, we've done terrible things as a country because of ego. We've pursued actions that we've clearly look around and go, hey, this doesn't seem like it's working out too well. Maybe we should stop. But you know what? This was my plan. We're going to keep doing it. And instead of someone saying, hey, you know what? This isn't going really, this is the second and third order effects don't really look as good as I thought they were going to look. Maybe we should stop what we're doing. And I mean, even look at the Vietnam War. You read reports now that LBJ and McNamara, they thought they figured that we could not really achieve victory in Vietnam about halfway through that war. And they kept fighting, and we lost another 25,000 Americans in a futile war that they admitted that they didn't think we could win. So what is that? That's pure ego.
All right, so I have a few minutes left with you here, and I don't want to I buried the lead, but I think of all the things that you've talked about, your three kind of big tenets, which is stay humble, discipline equals freedom. I actually think the hardest one, maybe not to acknowledge for human beings, but to actually execute for human beings. And that's saying something, because I think discipline is really hard for people to execute, but extreme ownership is even harder. And I saw you say a thing about, people want to focus on young generations. dude, this is not generational. Like taking ownership of your mistakes, your failures, taking ownership of your entire life is just, it is a difficult thing inside of human nature.
Yeah, it is. And the example that I always try and paint for people so that they recognize how intrinsic it is to blame other people and blame circumstances is, I got 4 kids and, I'd walk into the kitchen and the milk is spilled on the floor. And I look at my son, it's 5-year-old, 6-year-old son, and say, what happened? And he says, the milk spilled, right? The milk spilled. It wasn't him that spilled the milk. It was the milk that spilled. And that's
passive voice.
That's an instinct that we have. And it is so hard to overcome that instinct. It's very difficult to look at your team, look at your family and say, hey, look, I made a mistake here. This is what I'm going to do to fix it. This is on me. And when you start taking ownership, it actually gives you the power to make changes and prevent things from happening again.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, as opposed to, hey, this isn't my fault. This is Will's fault. The reason we failed on this mission was because Will didn't do his job. Well, that means it's not out of my hands. I can't control it anymore. Instead of saying, hey, look, here's the mistakes that I made. I didn't give Will the clear guidance that he needed. I didn't give him the support that he needed. That's why we failed. Next time, I'm going to make sure I give him clear guidance. Next time, I'm going to make sure I give him the support that he needs. So that way we won't fail again. Okay, well, now I can actually do that.
What's the extreme part?
Well, what's the
extreme part, Jocko?
Yeah, the extreme is that you try and do that with every single aspect of your life and your job and your mission. Now, there's a caveat. The caveat is, look, horrible things can happen to people that they have no control over. Your kid can get cancer. You can get T-boned on a road by a drunk driver. You're doing everything perfectly right. There are going to be things that happen in your life that you have no control over. And I get asked, how do you take ownership of those things? And the answer is quite frankly, it's you take ownership of how you respond. How are you going to respond to that terrible thing that unfolded? Your kid got sick. Okay, how are you going to respond to that? What are you going to do? How are you going to move forward? How are you going to support them? Oh, you got in a car accident. Okay, how are you going to recover? What are you going to do? Where are you going to move from here? How are you going to take that next step forward? So, but we have the ability, we can take ownership of much, much more in life than people usually think. And it goes back to that instinct to point your finger at someone else. It's so much easier just to point your finger at someone else and say, it wasn't me. It was Will's fault. It was Will's fault, not mine. And as soon as I do that, I feel good for, a split second. My ego gets the relief of not having to take the blame for anything. But as soon as I say that, I just became a victim and I lose control. So taking extreme ownership of your life in every aspect that you possibly can is going to give you a better life in all aspects.
So one last question, Jocko. It's a horrible question. I can't believe I'm going to do this, but I have to follow my curiosity. You've got a busy day. I've got 2 Navy SEALs on deck waiting to come on. So we all recognize our time pressure here. So forgive me when I say, I'm sitting there listening to you talk about extreme ownership, and I'm just curious. You're a deep thinker. I know. I've watched enough of you historically, philosophically. You're a psychologist, basically, at this point in your career. Do you believe in fate?
Not really. Not really. Well, let me rephrase that. I believe that there's a blueprint out there, but you're the carpenter. And even though you're looking at the blueprint and you can follow that blueprint, and if you don't make any changes, that blueprint is what's going to happen. But if you want to, you can start making changes to that plan. You can start putting 2x4s in different places, and you can really modify the way that building is gonna come out. So I think there's a blueprint there for your life. And if it's good and you like it and you can move forward, that's great. But if there's some things that you don't like about your fate, you need to step up, take ownership, and get those things changed.
I struggle with that back and forth. Everything in me says I don't believe in fate because I want the control that requires ownership of my own life. But I go back and forth on that sometimes. And so I think about that. I'm sorry I put you that deep philosophical question at the very end. So what I'll say is this instead. We have a mutual friend. He was my swim buddy, Shane McKenzie. I think you know Shane.
Yeah, I went through both with him.
Yeah, well, He needs to go back to Buzz to keep up with me in swimming, to be honest. I couldn't wait on Shane. I had to go in the New York City Navy SEAL swim. But he's a warrior. He's a badass. And I hope I can see you this summer, Jocko. New York City Navy SEAL swim. Anyway, we're going to get you. Okay, I hope so.
Depends what the summer looks like, but I'll try and find out when it is.
Somewhere early August. I hope so, man. I really appreciate the time you gave us today. Again, pick up the book, Extreme Ownership. The other one is Dichotomy of Leadership. Check out the Jocko podcast. Get yourself some Jocko fuel. Jocko, thank you so much.
Right on, man. Appreciate it. Good talking to you.
You too. There he goes, Jocko Willink, here on the Will Cain Show. We're not done with Navy SEALs, though, because there's about to be a rally of hundreds of Navy SEALs in Washington, D.C., in support of Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth. Two of those guys who I've swam with across that Hudson River in the New York City Navy SEAL swim, who Pete swam with, will be a part of that. We're going to ask why and what's about to happen in Washington, D.C. next on the Will Cain Show. Hundreds of Navy SEALs descend on Washington, D.C. next week as January 14th is the confirmation hearing for Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth. Why? What do the SEALs have to say about Hegseth? It's the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel, and the Fox News Facebook page. Hit subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Hey, big conversation. I don't like the word announcement. Conversation. You, me, the boys, the Willisha, about the future of the Will Cain Show here. So make sure you set a reminder. I believe we can begin that conversation tomorrow. So I hope you'll jump in. You'll join us. You'll jump into the comment section, and we're going to figure it all out together. Good changes coming to the Will Cain Show. All right. Joining us now, my friend, former Navy SEAL, Bill Brown, veteran, Patriots First Amendment support of Secretary of Defense nominee Pete Hegseth. Bill is organizing what's about to go down in Washington, D.C. next week. What are you doing, Bill? Are you standing? Are you sitting? What do we got going here? I can't tell. What are you standing?
I'm sitting. Maybe not the best
okay,
angle.
You're
here.
sitting. It's a power shot from below. It has you towering over me. Did you hear that, Bill? I might have just got Jocko to join the New York City Navy SEAL swim this summer. Maybe. It was a soft commitment from Jocko.
All right. Woo! That would be awesome.
We need to get him in the Hudson. I said that we'd be joined by two Navy SEALs. We might be joined by Jason Redman and Kaj Larson as well coming up here. They'll be a part of they're part of the New York City Navy SEAL swim every summer. I swam with all three of these guys, and they're going to be a part of what's going to go down in D.C. next week. So tell us, Bill, what is at least a portion of the Navy SEAL community.
Media was giving us negative media out there, painting a picture that wasn't true about us. And every year with your help and Pete, we were able to send a real positive, patriotic message of unity for our entire nation to see. SEALs coming across the country to swim across one of the most dirtiest and dangerous rivers in the nation to send a positive, patriotic message. We've raised millions of dollars to help other SEALs, Gold Stars, and their families, and other veterans. And, we totally support the warfighter class in this nation, supports Pete. We've had serious concerns with the Pentagon. There's no greater travesty than the withdrawal in Afghanistan, where they gave trillions of dollars of military equipment to our enemies. You can look at, they failed to speak up and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't let this spy balloon overtly and gather intelligence over our sensitive military installations. Or guess what? Maybe it's a huge national security concern with all the terrorist entities and foreign intelligence agencies out there to have an open border with the sophisticated technology and portable weapon systems that could cause mass horror in our country. And the Pentagon was asleep at the wheel. Real leadership is having the courage to stand up and say things that are hard. And Pete was the first person and the loudest person to say, hey, something's wrong with the Pentagon here. And it doesn't take a genius to realize he failed 7 audits. You don't, even this year, unaccountable over $824 million. Like, there's huge issues in the Pentagon: corruption, waste, abuse. You have individuals that they either were silent or bent a knee to the woke ideology, that put us all at risk. And so what we're doing is we're going to get together, and we want our nations, the leaders in our nation, our senators, our congressmen, we want them to know where the war fighters stand. And that's what we're going to do. This is kind of historic. We believe it's so important now. There's never been a greater threat assessment out there and at all. And with so many risks out there, we need our military to get refocused as soon as possible. So what we're doing is we're getting together. We're going to, number one goal is to be in that hearing, as many veterans as we can get in that hearing to support Pete, to let the senators objectively know, like, this is where we're at. We stand by Pete. These are your nation's war fighters. Listen to us because we care about our country. And then we're also going to march and meet us with American flags. SEALs only march with American flags. We don't wear masks. We're proud of who we are. We want everybody to know what we're about and what we represent. Meet us at the Vietnam War Memorial at 9 a.m. and come help us support Pete.
All right, let's bring in someone else who's going to be joining you that day, Bill. Jason Redman is a retired Navy SEAL as well. Jason, I know you just heard what Bill was saying. It's Bill used a word I think it's important, historic. I can't speak for every defense secretary nominee, but here's what I know. Bill, yourself, Jason, you guys helped drive a petition that last I looked was approaching 3,000 names in support of Pete Hegseth. Scott Mann, retired Special Forces Green Beret, put one for the Green Beret community together. I know that one's around 400 signatories. Stu Scheller, the guy who sounded the alarm about Afghanistan, took to Capitol Hill to meet with senators about Pete Hegseth. And I don't know what the number is, Jason, but I think it's over 100 guys who fought directly with Pete have also signed an endorsement of Pete Hegseth as defense secretary. So the point is, I don't know, again, I don't know if the historical context, but it seems, to Bill's word, historic that you're hearing from so many war fighters in support of Pete.
Yeah, I've talked about this last night, and Will, good to see you again. I talked about this last night on another podcast. I think the reason you're having so many of us that are coming out, one, you have the old regime. And I think the political system in America is somewhat broken, in my opinion. Now, Trump being elected, I think, is proof that it does still work. But we've got this division. We're so divided on both sides with different narratives and ideologies. And I think that's pervaded into the fabric of our bureaucracy, which is seen now at the highest levels of DOD. The majority of our Secretary of Defenses have either been former generals and senior leaders in the military, or they have been individuals that have been heavily entrenched in the leadership of the military-industrial complex. The problem with that, they bring in political biases, they bring in relationships, they bring in these things that influence their decision-making. Now we throw in a lot of the woke ideology that was happening over the 4 years. I think our Department of Defense is off track. Don't get me wrong, man. 95% of our military is amazing. We are one of the greatest and best, most patriotic fighting forces on the planet, but we're off course. The military should be focused on defending the homeland. It should be focused on enabling peace through strength, which means we need advanced technology. We need to be focusing on our next generation warfighters. We need to be focusing on AI, cybersecurity, all these different things, the threats we're facing. And right now, that doesn't look like what DOD was doing. It looks like they were more focused on, hey, we need more DEI briefs. We need more things like this, instead of focusing on how do we bring in the best war fighters to make the most lethal, effective military in the world. And then, God forbid, we have to fight a war. We're ready to do it. Pete is a reset. There are people that don't want him because he's not a part of the old guard. He's not going to bow to the old political connections. He's not going to bow to the military industrial complex that so many of these guys were tied to. He is going to bring this military back to what it is designed to do: protect America, project peace through strength, and God forbid we have to get in a war, we're ready to do it.
That's very eloquently and I think comprehensively put, Jason. You must have practiced it on another podcast. I'll have you practice it more, and you can also reiterate it on television. We'll get that on the biggest broadcast mechanisms we can, because it is extremely compelling. Bill, what do you think we should expect next week? What's your turnout going to be? What's it going to look like as you guys go to D.C.?
It's going to be a very big turnout. So there's a couple things happening. One is Jillian Anderson had a great idea. And her idea was, hey, let's organize a press conference just with war fighters and any elected officials, any senators, any congressmen and women who want to come and publicly support Pete, any military leaders, let's come on and do that. So on Monday at noon at the Courtyard Foggy Bottoms Hotel in the Lincoln Conference Room, we're going to have a big conference room. And I can't tell you how many emails I've received from people who served with Pete that are coming. They're coming from all across the country because they love Pete. They know Pete's the right guy for the position. They serve with them. They're going to be there. They're going to come speak. You're going to have a bunch of guys who served with Pete come in and speak for him at the press conference. You're going to have plenty of military leaders there. And it's an open invite to any senators or congressmen that want to publicly come out and support Pete, because we want to set the chessboard up for victory. We want inertia to move forward with Pete. We want it to be objectively clear where all the war fighters, where the warfighter class in this nation is. We're upset with the current leadership in the Pentagon. It's gone astray. It's time to get our ship steered in the right direction. Let's get the right skipper in there, and that's Pete. So then the next step is at 4 a.m. in the morning, a bunch of vets are going to line up right outside the Senate hearing at the confirmation building, and we're going to stack the place full of vets. And so we're going to have a two-prong attack. We're going to, first prong, highest priority is get as many vets as we can in the confirmation hearing. And then two, all the other vets, we're going to march. We're going to hold the moral high ground. We're not going to let anybody discredit our service or discredit our message. We're just going to hold American flags, no drama. We're not looking for any confrontation. We just want to be taken accounted for. We're going to stop at the memorial, say a few words, and just be there. And we're going to be there so when Pete is confirmed as the next Secretary of Defense, he can come out and talk to his supporters. We support Pete. Our country needs Pete. We need real leadership, and that's what Pete is. He's a real leader. He has the courage to say the hard things that everybody knows is true.
So you guys, the three of us know each other, and you guys know my relationship with Pete, and I'm open about my lack of objectivity on it, but I think my bias is well-founded. It's grounded in life experience and knowledge. You know, I just had Jocko on, and you guys have sung the praises of Pete, as have I. Let me do one thing. And I'm going to ask this of you, Jason. I think Jocko, he supports Pete, and he talked about why. He also acknowledged one of the criticisms of Pete, not the personal attacks and all that mudslinging, but, hey, has he ever managed something that big? Jason, you brought up, like, the guys who've run the Defense Department come from either, four-star generals or the military-industrial complex, McNamara outsiders, but inside the complex. Is there any concern of Pete's management experience up to this point? I mean, on one hand, people say it's a plus. Like he tapped out at Major, right? That's a plus because it puts him more in touch with the warfighter class, with the soldiers on the ground class. Is there any concern at all of you're managing a behemoth?
Well, let's take the example of the left's favorite icon, Barack Obama. Barack Obama didn't have a lot of experience. He was a local organizer who then moved into Congress and then obviously up into the office of the presidency. I would say this. Is it a concern? I think I agree. It's something that I had looked at also. But once again, I go back to the reset. I think we need to get things back on course. I think we need to stop bringing in the same people, or the same lane of people we have in the past, senior military leaders, our flag officers that have been entrenched in the military bureaucracy, or members of the military industrial complex. I think Pete is smart enough. I worked with Pete on Concerned Veterans for America. I was there for over 2 years speaking on stages with Pete. I put out a video about this. Everybody wanted to attack Pete and say Pete's a drunk, Pete's a womanizer. I did not see it. I stayed at the same hotels. I spoke on the same stages with Pete. I think Pete is smart enough that he reaches out and he leans on the people that are smarter than him and people who understand how it works. And that is exactly what Pete's going to have to do in the Department of Defense. I don't see Pete coming into the Pentagon and saying, I'm going to run this place. I am the emperor and you guys are all going to follow me. I think Pete's going to come in and he's going to look for the right people. Now, people who have stood for the things that are not aligned with what is best for our military, supporting those three things I talked about, defending the homeland, peace through strength, and fighting our nation's wars with lethality, people who weren't doing that and pushing their own agenda, I see Pete removing them. Those who were focused on trying to navigate this system and continue to build a strong military and support their people in the mission, I see Pete leaning on them and saying, okay, guys, I've never done this before, but guess what? I'm smart enough to lean on you to make sure we have a vibrant, strong, successful American Department of Defense.
Right. But again, really well put. Bill, we're friends. I hope you don't mind me saying this. So, I've been doing what I do for a long time. I'm very used to criticism, Bill. Very used to it. I'm used to hatred, right? We both fought different wars. Although, Bill, you've been fighting this war that I have fought for a long time, for a little bit now. So putting yourself out there, letting them know what you believe, and getting the blowback. So we've talked, you and I, about some resistance. But here's my thought, Bill, and I want you to tell me if you think I'm wrong. Because this is a new war for you to fight, right? I actually don't get the sense it's that big, Bill. Okay, there's some who's going to push back. I'm talking about within the warfighter community. But from my perception of what you've heard, Bill, it's in the minority. And I really want you to shed some, I feel like, again, I want to be very humble about my exposure to all of you guys and how much I know you and how much I'm plugged into your communities. Not just yours, but special forces and other communities as well. Bill, I feel like it's overwhelming. From the petitions to what you're going to do in D.C. to the anecdotal conversations, relationships I have, while there might be a little pushback, I don't get the sense it's a lot. I think it's overwhelming support from warfighters.
No, it is overwhelming support, but I never underestimate the curveball in the ninth inning. And so what we need to do, the fact that the threat assessment on a global scale now, there's just so many different angles. And you have China, they're tapping into the U.S. Department, they're tapping into telephone companies, they're flexing across the board, they're flexing in the Panama Canal. We need our military leadership. There hasn't been accountability in our military leadership. And that's one of the things you can't have. There's a couple things you need in war to be successful, to be victorious. You need a tactical advantage and you need discipline. And discipline does not come without accountability. And that's one of the greatest flaws in our current leadership is there hasn't been accountability. And so why are we advocating so hard? Because we've been downrange, because we realize how much has gone astray, how great the risk is, and how it is important to get the right person in charge there. And that's what's happened. There's a lot of intellectuals in the Pentagon. They failed to speak up and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't give up these airports first in Afghanistan. Or they failed to speak up and say, hey, you know what? Maybe we should speak up against this woke mob and say, hey, having these open borders is a serious national security threat to us. And I'm not talking about isolated incidents like in New York where they didn't properly vet somebody and somebody gets burned alive. I mean, we can have horror on a grand scale, like 9/11 scale, with the type of sophisticated portable weapon systems that are available out there. And if you do have a wide open border, it could be disastrous for a nation. There's not one intelligence agency out there that can say that anything I'm saying here is wrong. They failed to speak up. That's a huge concern for all of us. That's why, that's one of the reasons why we're advocating so hard. And that's why we're not going to get off the gas pedal, because it's too important for us not to be successful here.
Well, you know what I think you just highlighted there? Like, intellect is not a rare commodity. actually. Wisdom's a rare commodity. That's different than intellect. But you know what's extremely rare is courage. You guys know what courage is, obviously, and I think you're also putting yourself out there in a new realm of courage, in standing up when you're asking that of other people in leadership positions. I won't be able to be there next week. That was confirmed for me yesterday. I wish I could be with you guys in D.C. We're going to make sure we cover it because I do think it is historic. And I know that I'll soon see both of you on television. And we want to make sure we get as much exposure of what you guys are doing next week as absolutely possible. I'm proud to know both of you guys. I don't know when I'll see you next, but I look forward to it. Thank you guys both.
Thank you.
Will, always good to see you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
All right. Take care, fellas. We'll see you soon. That's Jason Redman and Bill Brown, retired Navy SEALs. You need to pay attention to your news cycle next week because that's going to be a heck of a statement, a heck of a showing next week in Washington, D.C. with the Navy SEALs in support of Pete Hegseth. Also, just one last reminder, 12 o'clock tomorrow. Come hang out. Let's talk. Let's talk about the Will Cain Show. I'll see you again next time.